Trade and trans. Let's start over again. Thanks, Susan, and thanks to everyone who's here attending our Connect Trade and Transportation Cybersecurity Threat Update webinar. First couple of housekeeping issues before we get into this. Please, everyone, mute your microphone unless you're speaking. We will be recording this today's session, and a PowerPoint will be available afterwards. There is a short poll in the chat, just a couple of questions. We'd like to find out, which functional representation do we have on the webinar? And then if you're interested in getting cybersecurity updates, just give us your email and we'll make sure that you're in that loop. We do want to encourage questions today. We want to create a conversation. This is, as I'm going to mention later, this is meant to be a conversation that's ongoing. So, but we've reserved 15 minutes at the end of our hour, which we will try to be crisp and get everybody out of here at 1 o'clock. But please write your questions in the chat, or at the end you can put your hand up, please. And let me next slide here. We want to thank our sponsors, OOCL Logistics and Hapag Lloyd. As Susan mentioned, my name is Joe Devine. I am the president and owner of Tetrault. We're a cybersecurity engineering firm that focuses on the trade and transportation and defense industries. I also chair the CONECT Cybersecurity Committee, and we are looking for new members on the committee. We have a good, robust committee, but we're looking for more folks in the technology, cybersecurity, or GRC world to join the committee. This is the second of several informational webinars that we're planning to raise cybersecurity awareness within CONECT, which is definitely on top of cybersecurity. The 10 o'clock call today had a couple of questions about that as well. It's becoming an issue that people, even business folks, are focusing on. We are hoping that this panel discussion will become a periodic event for CONECT members. Industry threat update sessions are common for other industries, and the trade and transportation industry is squarely in the crosshairs of the cybersecurity bad actors that are out there, including nation states that are determined to harm our national security and our economic security as well. Eventually, this periodic meeting will be a two-way conversation between the DHS cybersecurity professionals we have and the CONECT member cybersecurity groups. All right. Let me, sorry, there we go. I want to do introductions. So we're going to do this. We will have, I'll introduce each of the three DHS professionals, and they will then do a short presentation of their different perspectives on threats. And afterwards, we'll have some Q&A that I'll lead a couple of questions, and then we'll have Q&A from the group. So first off, we have, excuse me, we have Quinn Sullivan. Quinn serves as the intelligence officer for the Department of Homeland Security, Office of Intelligence and Analysis, the Field Intelligence Division in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where she predominantly focuses on topics that are related to economic security, cyber threats, and transnational organized crime. Quinn executes her responsibilities through partnerships with the intelligence community, DHS, component agencies, and other federal, state, local, private sector groups. She has over 18 years of experience working with the intelligence community. Prior to her service with DHS, Quinn served in various intelligence roles with the Department of Defense, and she is extremely well educated. It would take a lot longer to read off all of her degrees. I have had the honor of working with Quinn for the last couple of years as she serves on the CONECT Cybersecurity Committee with us. Quinn supports CONECT in many ways, often sending security reports of interest to the membership, and we're so happy to have her here. So thank you so much for joining us, Quinn, and if you would want to take your time now to present, that'd be great.
Thanks very much, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. So cybersecurity is a pretty complex issue. And when we're talking about cybersecurity in the areas of trade, that's really complexity on top of complexity, because trade is not really a sector unto itself. It's many sectors coming together. It's multimodal transportation, brokerages, commercial facilities, which include small, medium, and large businesses, communication sector, energy sector. It's multiple domains of air, sea, and land. It's government facilities, and so on. And many of these various sectors experience some level of interconnectivity and interdependence. So in the broadest sense, the best way I can boil down some of the top trends in cyber threats to trade is by looking at, in general, what are the top cyber threats to critical infrastructure, period. So I'm going to break it down to basically three main threat areas that I'm going to talk about. The first one is ransomware. So according to a recent NSA or a TSA report, ransomware remained the most prominent malware used against transportation sector in 2023. One of the most common types of ransomware we are now seeing is the double extortion ransomware, in which cyber threat actors not only lock down and encrypt your servers, but also steal personal identifiable information and other valuable information from the computers and threaten to post that information online to be exploited by other threat actors. Concerning statistic about ransomware attacks is that 60% of small businesses hit by ransomware are out of business within 6 months of the attack, according to Cybersecurity magazine. And according to Cyber Reason, a local cybersecurity firm, nearly 80% of organizations that paid a ransom were breached again. So basically, the best way to say is it doesn't pay to pay. A good example of this, in October, the Lockbit ransomware gang conducted a ransomware attack on an identified U.S. company that services commercial airplanes. Lockbit later published sensitive data from the company after it refused to pay the ransom, and that information was later exploited by other cyber threat actors. The second group of cyber threats that we tend to look at with regards to the trade industry would be advanced persistent threats. Though advanced persistent threats, also known as APTs, are a bit more rare and a bit more targeted than what we see with cyber criminals or hacktivists, the sophistication and skill is significantly higher and can have a potentially devastating impact on critical infrastructure. DHS and other partners have jointly assessed that the People's Republic of China's state-sponsored cyber group known as Vault Typhoon has compromised the IT environments of U.S. organizations in transportation and other critical infrastructure sectors. Vault Typhoon has maintained access to some of these environments for at least 5 years. Private sector and U.S. government cybersecurity reporting suggests Vault Typhoon has targeted or compromised entities associated with U.S. aviation, highway motor carriers, liquid natural gas pipelines, and rail modes. Third group of threat actors that we look at is hacktivism. So hacktivists are malicious cyber actors whose primary motivation is political, religious, or ideological, as opposed to financial and criminal, and whose cyber operations are not directed by an adversarial nation state. In the last few years, we have seen an uptick both in occurrence of hacktivism as well as an increased range of sophistication of hacktivist activity. Most hacktivists will exploit known critical vulnerabilities have not been appropriately patched and often like to target public-facing infrastructure, such as public websites, in order to maximize exposure. We have also seen an increased use of social media to message their alleged successes in order to build their bona fides, but in reality, the information is either false or exaggerated. The more successful hacktivists tend to conduct operations such as distributed denial of service attacks, which nowadays, like ransomware, you can actually purchase a DDoS as a service package from the dark web. An example of this is in early 2024, the Cyber Army of Russia Reborn, also known as CAR, cyber actors, a self-proclaimed pro-Russian criminal hacktivist group, conducted cyber attacks that caused physical disruptions to operations at 2 U.S. water utilities by exploiting poor cyber hygiene. Luckily, the attack did not cause disruptions that in the end impacted public health. That pretty much is my brief as far as looking at some of the main cyber threat groups and categories that we would look at as far as targeting kind of the trade industry. I leave you at this point with any questions you may have. Obviously, we can go into any of these in a much more detail. And we have lots of examples in which this has been used. And I know Bryan has a lot of great examples from his experience in working with all of you on the from CBP. So I leave it at that, and I turn it back over to you, Joe, unless you want to have any questions at this point.
No, thanks. That's great, Quinn. Thanks for getting us started. Appreciate that. Next up is Mike Tetrault. He's the cybersecurity advisor for Rhode Island, which is part of Region 1, within the Integrated Operations Division of CISA. Within the DHS. You may know CISA established 10 regional offices across the country to improve the delivery of these services, and Region 1 includes all of the 6 New England states. Mike manages the major cyber engagements in Rhode Island with providing additional support to Region 1, championing cyber resiliency to public and private sector partners through many engagements, promoting education, awareness, and he also performs risk assessments. His career began over 30 years ago as a private programmer analyst, including 18 years as an IT director within DoD before joining CISA in 2021. He also retired as an Army colonel in May of 21 after 31 years of service. Thank you for that, Mike. Mike's also very, very well educated, another guy with a lot of degrees, which I won't read off. And he also teaches. He's an adjunct faculty member at several colleges and universities in the area, teaching graduate and undergraduate cybersecurity governance, policy, risk, risk management and recovery courses. Thanks, Mike. It's up to you now.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that introduction, and it's great to be here. And yes, I'm a sucker for free education through the military, so I can't turn that down ever. But I'll just start actually by quickly just going over and kind of continuing on with a lot of things that Quinn just brought up regarding ransomware, Volt Typhoon, which we're obviously putting out a lot of information about that along, between FBI, DHS, and CISA, two different entities. And also the rise in hacktivism. I'll talk a little bit about how that has really impacted organizations, specifically with some of the recent world events. But really what I wanted to highlight just for everybody on here is that when I do cybersecurity, a lot of assessment work and things that I do, there certainly is a focus on the technical aspects and technical components of what we do for the different folks we talk to not have them be a victim of ransomware, for example. But really, cybersecurity is well beyond the realm of the IT director or the IT folks, right? They have a huge piece of it to help implement controls, technical controls that can help reduce risk. But it really has to be an organizational approach. You need leadership involvement. Everybody has a piece of the game, and everyone needs to be involved in what to do. I like to say the holistic look is the people, the process, and the technology. If you just focus on technology, you're certainly sure to become a victim. All of the ransom different events that I've seen here in the region, in Rhode Island and New England in general, have all been tied to hacking the human. It's a lot easier to hack the human, get someone to do something they normally wouldn't do, duping them, fooling them, threatening them, whatever it may be, to get them to essentially open the door into your environment. And then from there, you can implant the malware and go from there. So that's really the challenge, is having the workforce that's knowledgeable about what's happening, what is the threat environment, what is their piece. As we say in a lot of organizations, the employee is the ultimate endpoint sensor of what's going on. If you see something, let folks know, report it up, so that it helps you have more eyes on what's being happened and not fall victim. So you also have to have, along with that, solid processes. Again, a lot of times we get very busy in our working environment, our work world, and we just want to clear things off our to-do list. And folks are like, hey, I found this great shortcut. You don't have to do those couple of steps in the middle. You just go from here to here. And a lot of times in doing that, you short circuit the process, and that actually leads to things being done incorrectly. We're seeing a lot with organizations that are being duped into changing banking information of their vendors, for example, and not following that process completely, not doing the validation, not doing the follow-up, and then ultimately having things taken out of their organization. We also want everybody to understand you have to protect across three areas, right? Your confidentiality, as Quinn had kind of alluded to. You want to protect your integrity of your systems and the availability of your systems, right? You want to keep them up and running, especially if they're tied to a critical process that your organization relies on. Again, the double ransom. We're going to take away your availability by encrypting your things. Prior to doing that, we're going to extract your sensitive information out of your organization and then hit you with a second ransom to blackmail you to pay so we don't dump it online. So we're still seeing that very prevalent. The availability of Bitcoin and virtual VPN networks and the dark web and security and the different tools that are out there make it real easy. Low cost of entry to get into it, low risk of getting caught, especially if you're outside of the reach of the U.S. government or our partners or international partners. And, that's so prevalent that if you just are siphoning off a few $1,000s here and there, generally people don't want to spend those resources to go try and shut you down. So you need to understand all of that, understand that threat environment, understand what risk is, understand what your assets are. What are your technology assets? What are your people as assets? Where are your information assets that you need to protect, that you need to sustain? It's all done to try and reduce your risk of becoming a victim, but also building a resiliency program where you can have an incident response plan, have training, have awareness, so that if you are hit, you ideally don't have to pay the ransom. You can be up and running, and ideally not even let the adversaries know that you've been fallen victim. Again, that resilience piece is what's huge, is to be able to continue on, not pay the ransom. And this is all done in every day, right? It can't be just IT doing it every once in a while. It has to be collectively. The organization needs to be doing this, as frequently as you wash your hands when you go to the bathroom, right? Or whatever you want to say. Things that you do all the time to the point where you don't even think about it anymore. You just do it. and help the organization not fall victim, or if you do, be able to not have great impacts to your operations and what you do as an organization. So with that, Joe, I'll turn it back over to you, and I'll stay available for questions as we progress on here.
All right, thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. So wrapping up our first part of our webinar, the presentations. Bryan Smith is a supply chain security specialist for CTPAT with CBP. He's assigned to the Newark field office. He has almost 20 years experience in this role. Prior to this position, he worked since the mid-90s in various roles, including contraband enforcement team and supporting the post 9/11 emergency communications in the New York City metropolitan area. As part of CTPAT, Bryan has worked on various teams to make internal processes more efficient and move them to a cloud environment. Back in 2008, he took part in several joint evaluations in the European Union to prepare for the mutual recognition agreement that currently exists between CBP and EU. Beginning in 2019, he engaged in several workshops in advance of the release of the enhanced CTPAT minimum security criteria. Bryan provides training on the cybersecurity MSCs to CTPAT members and foreign customs agencies, and regularly speaks to trade groups and serves as a panelist at CBP summits like he's doing today. Also didn't know this, but also has created numerous cybersecurity training modules, which are located on the CBP's official YouTube channel, which I will be checking out. Why don't you take it from here, Bryan? And you're on mute.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you everyone else for joining today. Real quick background, if you're not CTPAT certified or never heard of us, CTPAT was the first government response after 9/11, the first official response by the federal government. We really started to ramp up our operations as a program in 2005, and today we have over 11,500 partners in this voluntary program. Basically, what it was an attempt to do was extend the borders of the United States outward to try and get our eyes and ears overseas more to see the traffic coming into the United States before the bad stuff got here. In return for the members joining the program, there's a whole host of benefits if you elect to join the program and that we find that you meet our minimum security criteria, which is all published online. There's about 13 major categories that you can join. There's importers, truckers, airlines, port terminals, you name it. Everything that's related to the trade community, as long as you have a nexus with the border and imports or exports, you're probably going to be able to join the program. I put my information in the chat if you want to talk to me about joining the program, or if you want to talk further about cyber within your company or anything like that, feel free to reach out to me. I'm very responsive. I'll get right back to you. So we are in a very unique position in CTPAT, and I take advantage of that wholeheartedly in that I look at things from a cyber perspective almost every time I go out and do a visit. I have to verify the criteria, but I tend to go a little deeper than other specialists. And I also get a chance to, personally, I get a chance to meet with some of the largest companies in the world and go over their spectacular programs. But I also get to see the worst of the worst. I get to see the companies that really mess things up. I get to see what happens when a company gets breached. And I work with them and walk through it with them in the days and weeks and months after an attack. So I have a lot of stories about that sort of environment and what that's like to go through. You know, I started doing this seriously and focusing on cyber back, I'd say at least 11, 12 years ago. And it's not getting better. One of the things I always like to point out is there is no one that knows the true number of how many bad actors are out there. And it's not really important except to say that it's a lot. And they're well funded. They're funded by state. They're funded by activist groups. They're funded by drug trafficking organizations. There's even, you know, corporate espionage out there. So they're funded by certain nefarious corporations that are operating, let's say, outside, you know, what's legal. In 2023, there was a 103% increase in reported ransomware attacks, and that's just what's reported. I know for certain because I've had companies tell me they don't report everything. Plus, it's very well known that a lot of companies don't report all ransomware attacks. There's nothing requiring some private companies not to report things. you can get really into minutia with that as to, which board of directors, which companies have to report, which don't. But we know that a lot of companies don't always report when they're breached, and they definitely don't always report when they paid a ransom. So the true numbers are probably a little bit higher, or could be a lot higher than what's being reported in the media. And what you even see maybe in some government reports, to be honest with you. Things are not getting better. One of the questions I always get in things like this, in forums such as this, is, do you see any light at the end of the tunnel? In some respects, I do. I see user authentication getting better. I see more companies, after what we went through with the pandemic, they're starting to use better passwords, getting away from the traditional password, the horrific 8-character password, which should be outlawed if it was up to me. But I also see some better interaction from top-level CEOs and C-suite people. I see more managers getting involved in what's going on with their IT departments, which I'll talk about maybe a little bit more detail in this forum, in this hour or session. But then again, I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel the way I would like to, because I saw that, just last year in calendar year 23, we had over 65,000 unique common vulnerabilities and exposures. We call them CVEs, that were discovered. So that's 65,000 basic threats to your system solutions, your servers, and everything else. Anything that can basically be attacked. We found 65,000 vulnerabilities that had to be patched and addressed by your IT departments. Patch rates for mitigating those vulnerabilities were coming in at about 62%. So that's still way below where we want to be. And just to give you a perspective, last year, over 500,000 entries, customs entries, and over $50 billion in imports were impacted by just 14 separate cyber attacks targeting the trade community. And our own systems are attacked over 160 million times a day. So one of the things that we've been focusing on in the last 6 months to a year through outreach programs such as this is the need for resiliency, the need for preparedness, for crisis management. And the CTPAT program has a whole set of criteria that touches on basically every aspect of your business or a typical company, from HR to just physical access controls, and of course, cybersecurity. And in June of 2020, we released a newly enhanced and a much more robust minimum security criteria, which was done in conjunction with the trade community. We didn't do it in a bubble as a government agency. We included actually more members of the trade community than were actually from our own organization. And cybersecurity got a lot more attention and a lot more robust, and it's exactly what we needed. And it was, I won't say exactly at the right time, but it came just in time for what we went through during the pandemic. And I think we saw during the last 4 years, a lot of companies get hacked. A lot of companies we don't know of did get hacked. That's one thing I want to point out to you, that you're not going to see this in the media. And unfortunately, with what's going to be happening in the next year with the election, if you remember, the election was front and center in 2020 and 2019. This year should be no exception. And a lot of this stuff is going to get pushed to the side. Even during the pandemic, when I saw through things that I can see, and I'm sure, Mike and Quinn can see who's getting attacked, who's getting hacked, et cetera. There were some large organizations that did not make the mainstream media. So please do not use the media as a barometer as to, things are getting better, things are getting worse. It's getting worse, and I see it getting a lot worse in the next few months up to the election. I think that's going to have a lot of things to do with what we see out there. Depending on what happens with the election, I think that after the election, you're going to see even more attacks to kind of take advantage of where we are as a country. Real quick, when the bridge went down in Baltimore, when there's a major snowstorm or tornado, any kind of an event, hacking groups take advantage of that, and they will dig down and they will go and try and hack organizations in those areas that were affected and take advantage of the fact that they're busy, that they're not exactly concentrating as much as they should be on looking for phishing emails. And that's a very common trait that we see all over cybersecurity. So that's all I have. There's a lot here. There's a lot to go over. And we're only in 1 hour's time, we're only going to basically scratch the surface. Very,
But we
very,
can
very
schedule
little.
we can schedule these frequently so we can keep these updates going.
Yeah, there's
It's
a
going to be a
lot.
lot to cover in just an hour.
So
But thanks for
so
that start,
I'll turn it
Brian.
over back to you, Joe.
Thanks, Brian. We're going to transition over to our question Q&A section here. Again, if you have any specific questions you want to ask Quinn, Mike, or Brian, please put it into the chat. And again, you can also raise your hand in a few minutes here. But we got a few prepared questions to ask. First, Quinn, for many years, ransomware has been one of the most prime attack vectors and has gotten the most news coverage. So a lot of business executives are familiar with that attack. Are there any other attacks that you'd like CONECT members to be aware of?
Hi, Joe. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's not even just the types of attacks, but it's the types of tools that are being used to facilitate attacks as well. So one of the things that I am pretty concerned about going forward is the use of artificial intelligence driven malicious attacks, because it is basically a force multiplier for a lot of malicious or cyber threat actors out there to be able to kind of really expand their attack operations, especially those that are financially driven. I mean, when we look at things such as, phishing emails, spear phishing emails, whaling emails, whatever you want to call them, whatever you want to kind of start with, when you look at the ability and potential for things such as artificial intelligence driven campaigns, you're looking at basically a much broader, much more expansive ability to kind of distribute some of this malware out there and to try basically cast a wider net, and in a lot of cases casting a more believable net in some cases. I mean, especially if you're dealing with like overseas actors who English is not the first language, and a lot of times we catch the phishing emails because of kind of a broken up version of English or formatting issues or things like that. This is where artificial intelligence can be used to kind of refine and improve some of the messaging to make phishing emails make them look more legitimate and more believable. So a lot of things driven by artificial intelligence, and I believe we're already seeing that pretty extensively. But going forward, as it continues to evolve, is obviously very concerning. So, but then when you get it to the other end of the spectrum of just some of the basic scams, cyber scams and stuff like that are out there, I'm sure these are things that every single company that's on this call right now has seen at one version or another, are things such as the CEO scams. Oh, send a bunch of emails to your employees saying that I need you to buy Apple gift cards, and for whatever event, or for the CEO. And if it's coming from the CEO, the last thing you want to do is say no to the CEO. So there's usually always a handful of employees that are going to go out there, buy those Apple cards, and provide the gift card serial numbers on them and everything. And next thing you know, they've lost a couple hundred to several $1,000s out of their own pockets. One thing we are seeing more and can be used by a variety of actors is social engineering attacks. So social engineering combined with things such as DNS abuse, which another version of that is like domain squatting or typo squatting. So basically, a lot of folks are on LinkedIn, and we see this especially targeting people that are on LinkedIn. Whether it's recruiters for, people posing as recruiters for your companies and reaching out to people, trying to get them to apply for jobs, and then basically redirecting them to a malicious site by providing a website that looks almost like the company's website, maybe one character's off or two characters off, or it's a .org instead of a .com, and then basically redirecting people to these malicious sites, and then engaging in credential harvesting and so on and so forth. So we see a lot of that where you have individuals will start out engaging with them on LinkedIn, try to hook them. Sometimes it's even within the company itself, moving people around. We're with HR, we're with this person. Please reach out, provide your resume to this site, things like that. So that's pretty common. Another one I would highlight is that maybe folks are not quite as familiar with is called quishing. So QR codes, quick response codes are very common in a lot of businesses. I mean, even if you go to a restaurant, a lot of times you don't even get a menu anymore. You see this QR code on the table, and you basically hover your phone over it, and then you can click a link and see what the menu is for that restaurant. A lot of businesses are using QR codes more and more. And the problem with that is it's very easy to put a malicious fake QR code over a legitimate one. So we have people that are being redirected to malicious landing sites where then, again, credential harvesting occurs, and then you have follow-on cyber attacks that occur as a result. So quishing is where QR codes basically being used for those situations. And then again, like I said, we've already mentioned the phishing, spear phishing, whaling, those types of malicious attacks. They've been around forever, and they've been around forever because they're still successful. So a lot of the ransomware events that we see are oftentimes connected to phishing or spear phishing attacks or campaigns initially as well. So just in general terms, those are the ones I'd probably would highlight as what most businesses are going to probably be seeing. There's so many different ways we could go with this. We could talk about brute force. We could talk about SQL injection attacks, all of this stuff. But I think those are the ones that probably highlight, especially the human factor behind cyber attacks more so than anything else, because it is targeting human behavior and hoping to basically profit off of that.
Yeah, I think that that information about for all business leaders, for all members of organizations, it's important to know that anybody could be getting an attack through social engineering. Eventually, as we get more technical folks on this forum, I think we're going to want to get into more of those technical examples that you have as well. Thanks, Quinn.
Yeah, Joe, that they use, again, back to LinkedIn social engineering, that's how the NGM breach happened, social engineering, the IT support folks that were supporting that organization. Again, back to what I had said earlier, it's really important to understand who are your vendors. A lot of companies are outsourcing their IT operations, which is fine. Just be aware of what potential risk will they bring to your organization should they have something go wrong. And again, back to what Quinn had just said on the human dimension, the insider threat is really, again, where we see a lot of the breaches happening. It's either intentional or accidental, right? I wasn't aware, I clicked on it, I didn't say anything, and I exposed the environment, or intentional. Hey, I want to make some money, I'm mad, I didn't get that promotion. We're also seeing where folks are being social engineered online and then extorted with, fake things. Oh, we've got pictures of you or videos of you in compromising situations, and we need you to get, if you get this information from your company, we'll make sure that those pictures go away. So that's an example of stuff that's being used to unduly influence somebody inside the organization. And if you don't have it properly, processes and technologies in place to kind of compartmentalize that, you can run into problems as well.
Yeah, least privilege, separation of duties, that kind of stuff.
And, finally, one other thing just to add on is a big thing that CISA is pushing is a secure by design. Right now, software comes out with vulnerabilities all the time. If I'm going to develop a software product, I want to be first to market with the most features, the neatest features, the easiest to use. And as bugs are discovered, I'll fix that later. If I spend all my time doing that now and I'm not first to market, I don't capture market share. And then I don't be the best company or the most profitable company that's out there. So again, it's that security by design is something to try to really push organizations that develop software and hardware to do. And it's just been really arduous and slow moving in that particular area.
We're moving faster than I had thought we would. I'm going to jump ahead with a question here. Bryan, listening to these threats and these issues that folks have to deal with, can you talk a little bit about how the CTPAT, cybersecurity, minimum security criteria help support crisis management, resiliency, business resumption if these companies do suffer a breach? Again, you're on mute.
Sorry, I did it again. Yeah, I'll answer that, but I wanted to dovetail off of what Mike just said. And I think it's important that people note that I get to speak to a lot of cybersecurity professionals and IT folks within organizations, both big and small. And the one piece of feedback that I've been getting for years and years and years is that, and something that I've been speaking about too, is the lack of coordination and communication between the IT department and senior management for a long time. And this was a well-known issue. And I talked about this with a lot of cyber professionals, is that if everything was working okay, everybody was fine. And a lot of managers took that approach. And I've even had managers and owners of companies point to their computers and say, everything's working, everything's fine, we're good to go. And they think it's kind of like a set it and forget it mentality, and that cybersecurity is not something that you need to stay on top of literally every minute of every day. That's going to have to become a norm. That's going to become part of the mindset of doing business in today's business environment, especially in the trade community. It's time now where the cybersecurity and IT departments are treated at the same level, with funding, with interaction with senior leadership, and in the hierarchical chain of command as any other traditional area of the company. Okay, they can't be kind of like out here on the wings, and they have to have oversight. They have to be able to report their metrics up and down the chain of command, and they have to be able to report what they're doing and their successes, and also where they have problems and things that they need to patch up and mitigate. But as far as the criteria is concerned, the new crisis management and business resumption criteria is absolutely important. I get to meet with companies quite often that recently went through a breach or are currently going through it. And it's rare that I have a company that went through it and came through unscathed. And one of the common denominators that I usually see that affects a company is how well did they prepare for a breach. And, for all of you sitting there right now, when's the last time you had a good, hard conversation with your IT folks? I think there's a few people in here that have IT backgrounds today. And then you can ask yourself that question: how often do your leaders that are not outside of cyber, how often do your CEOs and presidents of the companies really ask the hard questions? And are we prepared for a breach? Are we prepared for the phone calls? Are we prepared for the release of PII, personally identifiable information? Are we prepared to deal with our business partners manually, paper driven, and if we have to lose all our computers and all of our connectivity? For those of you that are on the cyber side of the house, do you have the trust of your leadership to be able to make a call at 2 a.m. on a holiday weekend and do a dirty shutdown of your network and literally pull plugs out of the servers? Okay. And I've seen that happen. And I've had companies that have told me that their organization rehearsed their crisis management, had good policies in place, and trusted their IT professionals to make decisions at 2 a.m. versus calling a call tree of 13 people that get permission to start the soft shutdown or have to transition to a dirty shutdown. Do you have significant plans in place if you lose a region, if you lose the global connectivity, if you have operations all over the globe? Do you have any kind of a backup plan? What is that plan? And did you rehearse it? And what I always tell companies, and I've participated in tabletop exercises, I've participated in a series of events through ISACs where I've seen these decisions get made, and people in other rooms are making decisions based on what they know and things that they don't know. And those of you in IT know what I'm getting at. You have to be able to make really tough decisions, and you have to make these rehearsals reflect that. If you do exercises and you write these policies, you got to make it hurt. You've got to make it as real world as possible. When you shut down, your business partners are going to know about it, and word is going to get out pretty quick. You're going to have to make notifications if you're an importer or if you're involved with the trade community. You're going to have to make notifications to CBP and your broker, and possibly your vendors, your trucking companies, and your customers, and your overseas suppliers. You have to rehearse this. What are you going to do? What is the plan in place? And how are you going to get back up and running? And I think at the beginning, Quinn did say, 60% of companies that are down for a period of days have like a 60% chance. And I heard it was as high as 70% chance of going out of business within 6 months. There's a lot of things that you need to have a good, hard conversation with your IT folks, with your cybersecurity professionals, whether they're internal, they're third party, or both. You really need to ask those questions and get those answers. And you need to develop a very good plan that you rehearse, because the companies that usually come out of this the best, and I've seen this firsthand, are the ones that have very high level buy-in, very high level cooperation and involvement, so that there's trust and communication. Trust builds up between the CEOs and the senior managers and the IT folks. And the communication part, when you have your senior folks in those meetings and in those rehearsals, they see what the IT folks have to go through. And it'll be, like I said, at 2 or 3 o'clock on a Saturday morning on a holiday weekend. And that's usually when these guys do their the bulk of their attacks. And if I talk to people at DHS, CISA, et cetera, they all say the same thing. HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, they all say they expect something to come. And the next one is the big one of the year, Memorial Day weekend. And then the next one after that is the 4th of July, whenever that falls. But then the one after that is obviously Labor Day weekend. Those are the big ones. But You know, like, let me say, I'll tell you, a lot of companies, you got to ask yourselves when you leave here today, if you got back in your car or you went back about your business and you could not connect and your business went offline and your people had to pull plugs and pull your stuff down, what are you going to do? And I've seen that. And I'm going to tell you something. I met with companies within a day, a week, and months after they were attacked, and they all had the same look. They looked defeated, exhausted, and it looked like they just ran a marathon, because it drains you, because you have no idea, unless you have a very good prepared response plan, you have no idea how many directions you're going to be getting stuff from, if you know what I mean by stuff. It's going to be coming from all directions. And then you have potential lawsuits and you name it. It's a lot better that you prepare and have answers, know who you're going to talk to, know what answers you're going to give, a chain of command for providing output to the media, output to your vendors and business partners, so that it's a good coordinated response and communication to all those parties. So if you didn't get the point yet, you can call me, we can email, we can talk about this further, but crisis management, business resumption is a big topic, because a lot of people in cyber right now are saying to approach this, you should have the mindset of not what if, but when. Joe?
Yeah, and the problem is, Brian, as I'm sure you see, is not only do folks not test these plans, a lot of them don't even have the plans. A lot of them haven't
Right.
really thought through what their plans should look like. Who are they going to need around the table? How are they going to communicate when email is no longer around? You know, who needs, Mike, do you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, you know, one of the things I'll add is a couple of the organizations I've talked to that have had cyber breaches and actually did not have to pay the ransom, still found that they were still having to spend hundreds of thousands, closer to $1 million in things like sending out letters that the data had been breached, and they or potentially could have been breached, and not, you know, having to answer questions from organizations, you know, customers, or in the case of state and local organizations, from taxpayers and constituents. And it becomes very disruptive to not being able to do what the company or organization is set up to do, because they're busy tackling all of the spin-off problems that come out of a breach of, especially if it's a breach of an organization and a theft of information, or a loss of availability of key systems. It really becomes very disruptive, right? You know, again, you've had organizations where 911 dispatch has been taken down. What do you do, right? And how quickly can you get up and running again? So there is a cost, even if you don't pay the ransom. And many times, if you don't have a really solid, you know, again, if you're going to try and transfer some of that risk and take out a cybersecurity policy, you know, it's not having cyber insurance could be helpful. It is certainly not a cybersecurity program. But it could be important, because beyond if you have an insurance policy for paying a potential ransom, more importantly is a lot of the cyber insurance organizations have a lot of pre-contracted companies that can do the incident response. Having your own organic incident response team can be very expensive and very unnecessary. But if something happens, you can draw on them, and they can do things like negotiate ransoms. If you choose to go that route, they can also help get you back up and running and whole again, and help you work through your incident response plans. If you have those, ideally they should be done ahead of time. So that's just some of what we see organizations doing. Is there is always a cost. There is always a cost, and it comes down to, do you want to pay now and implement the things you need to do, or do you want to pay far more later and potentially may not be around as an organization if things really go off the rails?
Yeah. So listen, we got a bunch of other questions to ask. I want to ask you each one more question before we turn it over. Although I don't see any questions in the chat yet. If anybody has a question, please write it in or pop your hand up. But I want to ask all three of you, you know, this is meant to be the first of many periodic, maybe quarterly conversations we have between, you know, your agencies and the CONECT member cybersecurity professionals. Can each comment on the value of this type of a conversation to your agency, and what you think the value might also be to these member companies? You guys, whoever feels free to jump right in.
Joe, I can start if you want. You know, a big part of you know, DHS CISA is standing up you know, cybersecurity advisors and protected security advisors in every state. A lot of the states now have multiple advisors. to have folks right there in your own backyard, so to speak, with direct access to the headquarters team down in Arlington, Virginia, which has a lot of really high-end cybersecurity professionals. We also have things like the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, the JCDC, where we're bridging that divide between the public and private sector. Again, free resources to most organizations in one of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. A lot of what we do in critical infrastructure can be protected. So we are non-regulatory, which is appealing to organizations. We can come in and advise and not feel that it's an audit or inspection. So you can kind of be more true to yourself about where you are with resilience and risk and help understand some of the best practices. So it's a resource that a lot of people don't realize exists. We're relatively new. We're the youngest agency in the federal government. But again, having meetings like this are an opportunity to get that information out. And if it's not me, you can certainly find my equivalent in your backyard in whatever respective state everyone's in.
Hey, Joe,
Yeah.
Quinn, I guess I'll go next. But yeah, for me, I mean, my agency deals predominantly with threat. So we're an intelligence agency. We're looking at trying to best understand the threats that exist out there, the threat actors behind it, the tactics they use, basically as a way to inform other organizations and other entities to develop strategies to combat these threats. So from what benefits my agency is understanding and receiving the threat information itself. So when there is a cyber attack, a ransomware attack, whatever the case may be, providing and sharing that information, not because we need to know about the victim. In all honesty, not if we can find a way to share things non-attribution, I am completely fine with that. We're not there to investigate. We're not there to enforce or regulate anything. We're there to understand the problem and understand the tactics that were used and how they were used so that we can share that with other partners who can actually make decisions and try to basically inform those out there on how to combat some of these threats that are out there. So that's how we benefit from it. How we try to provide back is actually through the intelligence bulletins that we push out both directly as well as through our Fusion Center partners. Every state, no matter what state you are in right now, has a Fusion Center. And that Fusion Center has DHS intelligence officers, as well as a lot of other partners who are out there. And a lot of them do have a cyber component within the Fusion Center. For those of you who are lucky enough to be in Massachusetts, Massachusetts' Commonwealth Fusion Center has a fantastic cyber program staffed by people who are very, very good at their jobs, and they push out bulletins regularly. So if you're in Massachusetts, and actually if you're in any of the New England states, if you're interested in being added to their distribution list, we can add you and you will get cyber threat products, vulnerability advisories. A lot of them are pass-alongs from other agencies out there because a lot of agencies are working cybersecurity issues right now and trying to get that information out there so that you at the network defender level can better prepare and defend your networks against the threats that are out there. But the only way we're ever going to really understand the threat is if we can get that threat intelligence to begin with. If we're only looking at one small piece of it, we're only going to understand that one small piece of it. And like I said, at the end of the day, non-attribution, we want to understand the threat actors. The victim information, aside from maybe what sector it's coming from, is really not valuable for us to understand the threat. But if we can provide you resources through CISA, through the fusion centers, through other resources that may exist within your state to help respond, mitigate, remediate, and prevent these kinds of events from happening, that's what we're here for. That's what your fusion centers are here for. So, so I'll leave it at that.
Thanks. How about you, Bryan?
A lot of what we do is meet with companies, and the companies that we meet with are the smallest in the world to the largest in the world, and we meet with their customers and their suppliers and brokers and freight forwarders, et cetera, all over the world. And a lot of times I find myself in the role of a translator, and my bosses like that I said that because a lot of the people that we meet with are middle management, or they're people within the organization or outside of IT, and we have to explain a whole host of things to them regarding security of their supply chain that need to be fixed. And cyber is sometimes seen as just one of them. And it's an important one, as we all know. But a lot of times you might read the criteria or something in one of our reports to a company might say that you need this and you need that and you need to fix this and this is a weakness. The people that have to make the case to the upper management and to the ownership to fund that fix, to mitigate that threat, don't quite understand what is being said. So my job a lot of times is to go in and explain this stuff in terms that non-IT, non-cyber people can understand so they can make the case to their senior managers. And that usually goes over quite well. And then I try and get them all to communicate. What I always try to communicate, especially to the small to mid-sized companies in our program or their overseas partners, the SMBs, is get the word out, join an ISAC or join an association that they may not call themselves an ISAC, but there are a lot of organizations based on industry sector types, regions, like in the Montreal region, the New York region, et cetera, that all get together and they share resources, they bring in speakers, they talk to one another, they share IOCs, which are indicators of compromise, threat information. They get information from people like Quinn and Mike and other agencies. But start reaching out, start learning what this is all about and seeing the seriousness of it, especially if you don't have anyone in-house that is cybersecurity trained and don't have the credentials or experience for it. Because comparing, one thing that I've seen is a lot of companies try and get by with just regular IT folks, if you know what I mean. And IT is one thing, but cybersecurity is quite another bear. A lot of companies try and get by with paying someone at the IT level as a network person to do the cybersecurity, but they just don't have that mindset and expertise to do that. And a lot of companies don't want to pay for the solutions that they need to do that. And I'm trying to push the fact that those days are over. You got to start treating your IT and cybersecurity departments like any other child in your agency or in your organization. It's time to fund them appropriately and get them the solutions that they need to protect your environment and your enterprise. And if you don't have the people in-house to do it, then it might be time to look outside your organization. And the reason I say that is because I get complaints from IT folks all the time that every single thing nowadays that a business seems to do, whether it's a new product, a new supply chain, a new supplier, whatever goes on within a company nowadays has some effect, increases the workload somewhat on the IT department. And these IT departments are overburdened, they're underpaid, and they're understaffed. And that's a well-known statistic that is out there. You can look it up, and we've known that for years. And it was 3 million worldwide before the pandemic, and I don't even want to know what it is now. I'm sure it's a lot worse. But keep that in mind when you're trying to put more and more things on your internal IT folks. First of all, ask yourself and ask them direct questions. Are you trained? Do you think you have the expertise to provide a good, cybersecurity defense for my company? And then if they don't, then you have to see, do you want to bring people in, or do you want to go third party, or a mixture of both? Do you have the proper solutions in place? Do you have the proper web monitoring and everything else? Do you need pen testing? Do you want to bring an organization in to do some sort of a drill to see just where your weaknesses are? So, this is a big topic. We barely scratched the surface today, but I'm trying to get across some of the major points from my perspective and what I've seen out there. And, because this is probably the first one of a series of events that we'll have in the future. And we'll hopefully focus more squarely on these a little bit more detail.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Bryan. Thank you. Appreciate all your responses there. Bryan, in response to what you just said about these internal teams, IT teams overworked, you think about all the digital transformation stuff folks are trying to do. They're trying to digitize their relationships with their partners, their suppliers, their customers. They're trying to present themselves in ways they never have before. And that does put a lot of burden on these IT groups. We definitely find that the best, the strongest and most resilient companies tend to rely on a combination of internal and external resources, because you can't get every expertise unless you deal with some enterprise level companies. But most small SMB companies, they can't get the expertise that they can hire, from a third party partner instead.
Joe, that's a good segue into the question.
We do have a question out there from Danielle. Thank you. If you work with a third party vendor, you want to read it, Mike?
Yeah. So the question is, if you working with a third party vendor, software company that uses a simple 8-digit password system, how can you increase security without that company improving their system? Well, that's actually exactly the problem. That's what I was alluding to, right? This external dependency you have when you go to other companies. A lot of what you should be doing is vendor management, looking at what is your resiliency requirement? What are your sustainment protection requirements for your stuff? And are they working at the same level you are? Or do they run a little more loosey-goose and accept more risk? If you're not comfortable with that, it's time to start looking at other vendors and using cybersecurity practices as part of the bid process, as part of the vendor evaluation process. Do they have third-party companies coming in and doing audits of their cybersecurity controls and their cybersecurity practices? Do they have a SOC, what we call a SOC 2 audit, is a very common one, type 2 SOC audit, security operation controls. If they don't have that, you may want to look at another vendor. There may be a vendor that's cheaper, but they're cheaper because they have zero cybersecurity practices in place. Therefore, they're highly risky to you and could end up costing you. So you want to make sure you understand that as part of the contracting process. And also what happens, have legal language in that says, what happens if you are breached? You know, we transfer our risk to you to do things better than we can. But at the end of the day, I still own the risk if you don't take good care of my information and have a breach. So those are things you need to look at up front and actually, you know, vote with your feet. If they don't take it serious, look at other vendors and move on. And that's
And
really
Danielle,
what we do.
And Danielle, I would venture to guess that if you push them on this, they will increase that character minimum to 12 to 16. I think NIST is saying a minimum of 16 nowadays is a good place to start. And you really want to look at, you want to do your own research and look at passphrases or longer passwords, meaning well in excess of 12, or passphrases that use 4 or 5 unrelated words. And I'm telling you, it sounds, if you never heard of that before, I know some people at first get scary, but when it's explained to you or you look it up, it's actually a lot better and it's a lot easier. And if you prepare a proper passphrase, the CTPAT program does not require you to change that regularly like we used to, because NIST says if it's properly designed, it does not need to be changed unless you think it was compromised. And if you push that company, I'm sure that they will come in line with what NIST is saying, that the 8-character password should be abandoned. It's dead. It's outdated by 23 years now. And that company, it's not a big lift for companies to do that either. I don't know if they're coming back to you and saying, no, we can't. But going from 8 with all the modern systems to 16 or more, or even sentences as a password, and believe it or not, that's an option on many websites now. If you push them, they'll probably be able to do it for you.
Well, thanks, Brian. We need to wrap this up. I wanted to thank everybody. Lucky we got through all of our questions. Quinn, Brian, and Mike, thank you so much for sharing your expertise today and working with CONECT to better prepare our members to improve their cybersecurity maturity posture. I'm sure this is very beneficial to our attendees. This is being recorded. I did put my email into the chat. If you have any ideas or suggestions for, improving these going forward, or topics that you'd like to see on the cybersecurity webinar series, please let me know. Let me pop over this one more time. Thank our sponsors as well. Let's see here. And there is a poll question. If you would just want to let us know your demo, who are you, who you, if you want to get updates directly from us, we can pass over, any security updates we get from Quinn or from Mike or from Brian directly to you if you want to sign up for that. Otherwise, thank you all for participating. Really appreciate the OOCL Logistics and Hapag Lloyd for sponsoring today. And thank you, Susan, with CONECT, for pulling this together.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Brian, Mike, and Quinn. That was really informative. We look forward to the next session. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.